You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, guys, very excited about today's episode. We have the opportunity to speak with Chelsea Brennan, who was the creator of the Family Emergency Binder, which has really, if you're in the personal finance space, if you've been a fan of this podcast or other similar podcasts, I'm sure you have at least heard in passing, it is a phenomenal legacy binder put together to help families come up with an action plan in case of, well, the worst type of emergency. We're going to actually go behind the scenes and explore her story and her path to a fully funded lifestyle change and financial independence. And she has an incredible story, actually be working her way up and becoming a hedge fund manager, having this incredible multi-six-figure salary, but then walking away from it far before reaching financial independence in pursuit of a lifestyle choice, in pursuit of reclaiming her most precious resource, her time with her family. We're going to explore her origin story, her path to that position, and then her path away. It's going to be an absolutely fantastic conversation. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I'm doing quite well. And yeah, I mean, I love unconventional choices, especially in service of a happier life, of a better lifestyle. And it seems like Chelsea certainly did that. And it's just going to be a fascinating story. I mean, who walks away from being a hedge fund manager? And she's got this amazing story, and not to mention this family emergency binder. What's so cool here is that my wife, Laura, and I, actually, at the time we're recording this, we are going through and filling this out. And it's proved to be such an essential tool for us. And I almost can't believe we didn't have something like this in the past. So a huge thanks personally from me to Chelsea. But with that, Chelsea, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me.
Chelsea, so many people in our community, part of the equation is how can I earn more? I guess just to set the stage here, in your peak earning years, what was the most you ever earned in this role as a hedge fund manager?
About $450,000.
400. Wow. Okay. So let's just take two steps back from that, because, there are many people on this path that are actually aspiring to earn some 10 or 20% increase on what they're making now. And just like me, have no idea, what does it mean to be a hedge fund manager and what is entailed to get that sort of position?
So a hedge fund manager is an interesting position within the industry of how they would phrase it. So within the industry, I was just known as a VP of our fund. But as you reach that level, you get your own book where you're managing actual dollars for the overall business. You have responsibilities for the whole hedge fund. So the hedge fund I worked for managed about $35 billion, and I had responsibility for 1.4 of it. I started on Wall Street as a research analyst. So what I did is publish stock recommendations for portfolio managers around the world. And while I was there, built some relationships with people on what we call the buy side, so the people that are actually buying and selling stocks and bonds. And that's how I moved over to the hedge fund side. And I had a very deep expertise because of my time in research in metals and mining companies, which was very random and not something I ever imagined I'd be doing. And the hedge fund that I ended up working for needed somebody with that specialty. And it just was, I had built a relationship with one of the portfolio managers at that fund and was able to connect at the time he needed someone.
So Chelsea, metals and mining expertise. How do you get that kind of random knowledge? I mean, I'm assuming you didn't go to college for metals and mining, right?
No, so I was an economics and mathematics double major. But when you join a place, so I was actually at Goldman Sachs on Wall Street. When you join as a first year, you don't actually have any say on what team you go on. And as an intern, I had worked on pipelines, which is like, oil and gas pipelines, another random space. And I knew I liked commodities. Commodities are very global. They move based on political actions and all kinds of things. And I wanted to work on that space. So I did request to stay in that space. And the only opening when my year came in was metals and mining. And at the time I was like, this is going to be the most boring thing in the world. But as you got deeper knowledge in it, I just loved it. So I got the opportunity to meet with major global CEOs and go visit their sites and go underground in coal mines. And I dove in.
So Chelsea, I mean, there's so much here, and I guess the first place I want to start is you graduate college, you get an internship with Goldman Sachs. How much were you making in that first job or two? Because you didn't start, hey, graduate, here's $450K.
No. So in that space, bonuses are really important. So my first year, our base was $60,000 and my bonus was 30. So we made 90 that year in total.
Cool. Now, you mentioned there was a lot of somewhat random chance in your actual path, but I'm curious for our audience who, for the sake of this conversation, probably isn't going to be content with random chance. Like, let's say you were mentoring someone who's a decade behind you and they have this fixed goal of achieving what you achieved, getting to your level in the industry. What is the most obvious path, both from college and then maybe those first two assignments post-college?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say was depend on where you're going to school. To go directly into a hedge fund, which is not what I did, but if your goal was to work for a hedge fund, you still have to go to one of those top tier schools, an Ivy League school or some of the big name schools, because hedge funds primarily still recruit from a small handful of schools. So I think we only recruited from 5, whereas big banks like the Goldmans and the Morgan Stanleys will recruit from a wider audience because they have greater needs. Their funds are bigger. Their companies are bigger. So if you were to not big name college, I would recommend networking as much as possible. If your school runs any kind of career days, finance days, things like that, some companies bring in specific, like, okay, we're going to do a presentation on what it's like to work at Goldman. Go to those things, speak to the people that are there. That makes a big difference, showing interest, showing that you gave knowledge in the space. And then be open to the jobs that are available. So you might want to be a hedge fund manager, but the first stepping stone to that might be research. It might be trading. It might be investment banking. And the reality is that you don't actually know what you like yet. So if you want to get into the field, that's the first step, and be open to learning and to experiencing, because once you're in the space, it's easier to move laterally. If you're in a big school, big name school, I would connect with the hedge funds in the areas that you want to be by just reaching out either to HR departments or your college's career network, because those schools tend to have direct input into who recruits with them, and see what their application process is, and just get in early. Have some knowledge about the markets and why you want to work in this space. Once you're there, just be open. You're not going to get to necessarily work in something that sounds fascinating at the beginning. Like, there are positions that just cover general industrial goods or cover rental agencies. It sounds mind-numbingly boring.
I was actually going to ask you a very short follow-up on that. So if you were going to put yourself in the situation of that person, why did you want to work in that space? I want to make $450K. Okay. But actually, when you're expressing that to HR department, what is it about, an 80-hour a week gig possibly that is attractive to you?
Yeah. So you're constantly learning in that job, and there's no stability in your day to day, because you're getting to look at new companies. Companies are changing, they're making acquisitions, and you have to really have a real desire to learn, because there's no point where you're like, I know everything I need to know. So a real curiosity about the markets, a real interest in business. And I think that's something that sometimes gets missed, is like people are interested in the stock market and they're interested in investing and making a lot of money. But what it comes down to is really being able to understand how businesses work and what makes them succeed, and being able to sit down, like in that role, more senior role, being able to sit down across from a CEO and decide if you trust them or not, and decide if their plan makes sense. And that's the part that can be really interesting for people, is like, I just want to learn. I love business. I love business strategy. I love having things be a little different every single day. And that's usually what we're looking for, is someone who's creative and can learn quickly.
Chelsea, you mentioned a couple times sitting down across from a CEO. And I'm curious, just like your thought process, this is just my own idle curiosity, like that first time, I mean, you're in your 20s at this point, right? Mid to early 20s. Sitting down across from a CEO or meeting them at their location. What does that feel like? I mean, is there any imposter syndrome at all? Or is it you picked up enough knowledge on the job that you feel comfortable? What does that genuinely feel like?
Oh, it's terrifying. It's completely terrifying, especially because, so I graduated college a year early. So the first time I had to do this, I was 21. And we were at a conference. So funds set up meetings directly with management teams. And my boss at the time, he wanted to meet with another company, and our meetings got scheduled at the same time. So I had to go on my own to meet with the CEO and CFO of this major metals and mining company that we covered. And I was just like, I'd been on the job for 4 months. I felt like I barely knew the space. And here was these two people that we could impact their business. We published research reports that could move stock markets, right? So they were looking to me to have some expertise and I had none. And I think it was scary. They're used to it. Like they know that this is our role and they know what our role in the market is. And it took a few times to really understand that being completely honest with them was usually the best way of like, don't pretend you know what they're talking about if you don't know what they're talking about, because you're just going to get lost. And particularly with like the steel mill guys who would start diving into the different types of mills and how steel is made. When I was new, I was like, okay, back up. Like, what are you talking about? It was really scary. But over time, that was my favorite part by the end of it, was really diving into business strategy and cost management and customer acquisition and all that kind of stuff.
So Chelsea, as you said, you're constantly learning in the job, even in something you would never have expected, metals and mining. And I guess you went from Goldman Sachs to Bain. How does this work? Like when you went to Bain, was that a jump in salary? Was that the impetus for the move? And like, how do you eventually work yourself up to the final salary that you got?
Sure. So when I was at Goldman, that was what we call the sell side. So you're selling the products or you're publishing research, what I was doing. You're not actively investing your own dollars or anyone's dollars. And after 3.5 years at Goldman, and I had all this knowledge, I wanted to test my ability to actually, build investment returns and invest money in my own book. So I started to look for opportunities to go to the buy side, and someone from Bain reached out that they needed an associate to work on their metals and mining team. So I moved over there, and because the buy side generally earns more than the sell side, my total income at that point about doubled. And then when I was at Bain for about 1.5 years, I was promoted to VP, which is when I took over my own book, and my salary jumped again. And that's how I got close to that. I think my last 2.5 years, I was somewhere between that 400 and 450 number consistently.
So Chelsea, obviously, I mean, this is a healthy salary, but it's also...
Healthy? Is that the word you came up with, Brad?
Yeah, let's go.
We used to call it stupid money.
Stupid money. Okay, I like that better. I was being understated, but we'll go with stupid money.
You're doing quite well.
Yeah, doing quite well. So, okay, you're making an enormous salary, and so are your colleagues. As I understand it, this is a punishing job. I mean, these are 60 to 80 hour a week jobs. This is not a lifestyle play. For you or for anybody else that you knew of or spoke with, was it a means to an end? Was there like, okay, we're going to do this and work hard in our 20s and early 30s and then ride off into the sunset? And I mean, was that ever talked about? And I guess most importantly, did you ever hear or see anybody who actually did that?
No. So generally what happens is that people would spend 20 years in that space, just grinding, crushing it, moving up. And then they would take a couple of years off, somewhere between, 45 and 50, spend some time with their kids. And then they'd go back and work in corporate. Like they'd go work as a CFO, or they'd go work as a, advisor to companies or things like that. They'd get back into the workforce. And this idea of early retirement, financial independence really wasn't there. And it was something that I think the companies actively didn't want talked about, right? This idea that at that salary level, you really could retire quite quickly if you kept your expenses in check. They wanted people to stick around, especially on the hedge fund investment side, because you're grooming knowledge, you're teaching people how to manage, and you don't want a lot of turnover in your managers, because then you have to explain that to your investors, right? And there was actually an incident right before I left, a couple months before I left, where this senior guy, he was a partner, he'd been around since the start of my firm and had been making 7 figures for multiple years. And he resigned, and his daughter was going into college, and he wanted to watch her play her college sports and whatever. And I made a comment to some other VPs like, oh, he's retiring. And the reaction was visceral of like, oh no, he couldn't afford to retire. Like he's just taking a couple years off and then he'll go back to work. And I remember standing there being like, he can't afford to retire? Like what has he been doing? And of course he can't afford to retire in any normal sense, but you get so caught up in needing that income to, whether it's for self-worth, whether it's just for comfort, it's hard to walk away from.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. Did people build lifestyles that cost? I mean, I can't imagine a lifestyle that costs 7 figures, but I'm assuming there are people that spend that. I mean, did you see people who literally were, almost paycheck to paycheck on hundreds of thousands of dollars of income?
So what you saw more was, and this was a difference, I think it occurred at the hedge fund as well, but at Goldman, people were much more transparent about what they earned. So we had a much better insight into who was really money stressed and who wasn't. It was also an open floor plan. So you just had way too much information about everybody's lives than at the hedge fund. But yes, you absolutely had people that were in debt or living paycheck to paycheck. And what would happen a lot of times was, especially in the hedge fund world, so 2/3 of my income was bonus. So I made 2/3 of the money that I made one day of the year. So you would have people that lived lifestyles that exceeded their base salary all year and then would hope that their bonus was enough to cover the rest of it. And that happened probably less as you got super senior, as you were making, the 7-figure numbers, but definitely that mid-level, we would consider mid-level, that around $500,000, you definitely saw people that were just overstretched. And I had a colleague that was promoted to VP, bought a almost $1 million house, and then the next year was talking about buying a house in Vail. You're like, I'm sitting there like, you can't afford that, dude. That's too much. But that was the lifestyle. That was the whole work hard, play hard thing of I deserve this. And it was a tough mentality.
Chelsea, I'm curious about investing actually, and what you and your colleagues did. I'm looking at a Business Insider article that you wrote. And you said at this point, we've all heard of Vanguard and index fund investing, but if you're still assuming index fund investing is only for the layman, you're wrong. Myself and many of my colleagues hold the majority of our assets in index funds, even when we spend our days picking stocks and bonds. Why? I'd love to hear you tell us why.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of us, we know our own weaknesses and we have enough stress of trying to maintain our work portfolios that when the market is crashing, you just can't handle a fall in your work portfolio and a fall in your personal portfolio. It's way too much stress, and most of us know that. We also know that any ability that we have to pick stocks and bonds, and now in my hedge fund position, I was in the distressed debt market, which is slightly different as far as like, there's no index fund for that, right? There's no offset, just a different world. But we knew it came from deep expertise of that one market, right? Like we knew the CEOs and we knew people in the trade networks and we read everything about it, and it came from that. And we know we can't know everything about all the markets. And it was just easier both mentally and to maximize long-term returns to be mostly index funds. Now, did we also co-invest into the hedge fund so that we had assets that benefited from any change in the hedge fund? Absolutely. Did some people have small pieces of their portfolios that they turned over to financial advisors? Some of them did, especially as you got to much higher wealth levels. Most hedge fund and investment people have restrictions on what they can do themselves because you don't want conflict of interest versus like your fund. But most of us were almost entirely index funds.
That is mind-blowing. I mean, honestly, I'm just sitting on that. I'm going to replay that on loop for the rest of the day because that is a framework shifting type question. And thank you for giving us that level of detail with your answer. Now, I want to actually take a step back and go to that point you made about lifestyle inflation, and actually the other half of lifestyle inflation being essentially the golden handcuffs. You are for us talking in the suburbs out of Richmond, Virginia, you are a highly, highly compensated employee, and probably for most of the people listening to this, they would agree with that. But I would imagine everything's on a spectrum, and people that were making multiples of what you were, and you had to know that that is coming if you stayed in that industry for long enough. It's that golden handcuffs, right? Like you ended up walking away. Was it an easy, obvious choice, or was it incredibly difficult?
It was incredibly difficult. And the problem is you get stuck in this bubble and everyone around you makes that much money or more money. And I had colleagues that would leave my firm or other firms and be like, well, they're not paying me enough. And in moments of clarity, you're like, what is enough? Like, why is this still feel so undervalued to people? And looking at my boss's jobs and seeing the income that could be made and the financial security you could get for that had to be a place of, do I actually want that job? And for me, I always knew I didn't want to do this long term. There was a decision point in college where I was going to be a teacher or I was going to go into finance. And those are obviously very different choices. And
can we slow down that for just a second? I just don't want to breeze by that. Like, why was your frame so different? Why were you not anchored? Like, there's these individuals making $1 million a year that know they will never be able to retire. And they're right. But that's not your mindset. Why?
I was and am a compulsive saver to the point that it has caused issues. So I told you my first Goldman salary was $30,000. I wanted a bike. And I stood in the bike shop almost in tears of like the fear of spending the money. And this is something I've had to work towards for a long time to get control of. But I was terrified of not having that financial security. So I saved everything. We saved such a huge percentage of our income because I was always afraid that we'd get to the end of the year and my bonus would be zero, which in most cases is like, especially in my hedge fund firm, is like unheard of. That didn't even happen in 2009. But I had to live in a place where we were saving 20 to 30% of our base salary because that's just my mindset. I'm just, I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop because it didn't seem real to me, right? And a lot of the people in my space had parents that were super wealthy, or they came from worlds where this was normal. And this was never normal to me, right? Like this level of income was never normal to me.
One more question right around that. When everybody around you is spending six figures, maybe they're spending seven figures and they're going into debt to finance the rest, was there any part of you that just felt like an imposter and like you're hiding this truth about yourself that you are saving, 50 to 30% of your base plus the entire time? Like, I'm really curious about, you're the only person doing this, right? No one around you has an exit strategy and you're saving a tremendous percentage of your income. What is the interplay there between you and your colleagues?
Yeah. So first, I don't know if no one else was doing that, but no one was talking about it. It was not something that was discussed. And the lifestyles that were discussed were the more high spend level. And when we bought our house a few years ago, so we bought a house that was in a neighborhood that was less high status, and it was half the price of most of my colleagues' homes. And I definitely got a lot of strange looks of like, why? Like, why would you buy there? Like, it's not, the schools aren't as good or whatever their reasoning was. They were very confused. And there was always that strange interplay of, my husband and I want a homestead and we fix almost everything in our homes ourselves. And I still make, most of our food from scratch. And that was hard to not have. I had a few close colleagues that I really liked and got to know, particularly at the hedge fund, but there was always this gap of winter would come and I still came to work in a Carhartt. Like that was my warm coat and I'm just going to wear it. And it was not what was happening with anybody else. It was isolating at times.
So Chelsea, you said you planned for that $0 bonus, even though you knew realistically it was almost a 0% chance you were going to get no dollars for your bonus. And you saved 20 to 30% of your base. But when you got that bonus, did you dump it all into savings or some type of investment? What occurred on that day when you got this just massive, massive bonus?
Yeah, you're basically getting a windfall once a year.
Oh, yeah. It was always fun. You saw your checking account balance go up massively. You also had a little bit of a heart attack about how much went to taxes. But I am a planner, so I tended to have a spreadsheet of what we were going to do with that money before it hit, because we find out about a month before it actually gets paid out what that number is going to be. So my husband and I would sit down, we'd decide where it was going. 95% of it went directly into investments. It either went into retirement accounts or it went into our taxable savings. And I just left it alone. The last 5%, we'd usually take $500,000 each for our spending money to do something fun with. And then our vacation was usually funded out of that. But that was it. Just went straight into investments.
So like agonizing over a bicycle purchase, I'm assuming, is one of those $500?
Yeah, that was that.
I hope you have that bicycle now.
That bicycle, this is a horrible, that bicycle got stolen.
Oh, no. You should have moved to the better neighborhood.
Well, it wasn't that neighborhood. No, I loved our neighborhood. That was when we were still in New York in an apartment. They got stolen out of the apartment complex.
So Chelsea, you said that you were contemplating being a teacher or maybe going into investment banking. And obviously those are two very different career paths. But you've also said that you're a compulsive saver, and you mentioned in there a need for security. And I'm curious, what was the ultimate decision point between not picking teaching and going towards investment banking? And did that need for security and the savings play into it?
Absolutely. So what happened was I have a desire to have an impact. Like I want to leave a kind of legacy that I did something that mattered. And that was the decision point between investing and teaching that was really hard for me, because even early on in my career, I never felt like investment management was, going to do anything super positive for the world, right? But the need for security outweighed that. And I said, like, okay, if I did this for 10 years, I could go do whatever I wanted to do and do it without panicking about whether I had to take a low income, whether I had to take no income for a while. It was going to give me options.
And it sounds like you did, in fact, have options, right? I mean, you're making the choice to leave while everybody else is on a 20-year plan and then going to work essentially forever. You follow through in that. And let's just kind of, go to the present stage where you're about to leave your job. What was the decision there? Because you obviously get some level of fulfillment from your job. You're incredibly good at it. What was the other half of this when you started thinking about leaving this job?
Sure. So we were 4 to 5 years. So it was going to be longer than 10 years to reach full financial independence, never work again. And that was kind of the goal. But after my first child was born, I started to go through some pretty bad postpartum depression with him. Didn't recognize it for what it was, so it went untreated for a long time. And then when we got pregnant with our second, there were some health complications that went on due to stress and some other things. It reached a point where it didn't seem worth it anymore. We're talking like tears on the train every single morning that I had to go, and was just feeling completely unfulfilled. And I hated leaving my oldest. And at 32 weeks, my water broke and I was in the hospital. We were preparing for the baby to be born, my son to be born early, and NICU stays and the whole thing. And I just said, I can't do this. Like, I just can't. I was sitting in the bed worried about my job, and it wasn't worth it. And we had those options, and I'd done all that work to get those options. And my husband, who's a stay-at-home dad, was totally supportive of like, we got to make a change for the boys, for you, for mental health, whatever it is. You need to be happy. You can't just be like torturing yourself for 4 or 5 more years just to reach some balance in the bank account.
And I wanted to zone in on this one, just this sense that you are a planner, right? You have a plan, but at the same time, you're coming to the end of your rope. You can't keep all these kind of moving parts going at the same time. And you feel like you're running out of options. When you decided to leave, how did you plan that out? Was it just, hey, here are my 2 weeks? Like, how did this kind of unfold?
This all happened in early December. So our bonus season is end of year. And I was worried about what would happen with my bonus if I chose to leave. And I was worried about maternity leave and kind of leaving people in the lurch. If I had a team at that point, there was a whole process. But when I was pregnant with my first and I sat down with HR just to prepare for maternity leave or whatever, they said, we understand sometimes you don't want to come back after you have a kid. Just tell us as early as possible. Like, we have a policy, we'll pay you through maternity leave. We just want to know. We want to have enough headway. So I sat down, pulled up the spreadsheet, put in like, okay, if they gave me my normal bonus, maybe not quite as high as, they would have, and they pay me through maternity leave, how much time do we have? Because I didn't want to touch our retirement funds. I didn't want to touch our taxable investments. So we could have, I just didn't want to. What would that look like? And when I ran those numbers, it gave us about 2 years to, without changing our budget, to just live and build the business. Now I had the blog at the time, but because of rules with the hedge fund, it couldn't be monetized at all. So it had some traffic, but it wasn't at all monetized. So I assumed we made no income over those 2 years and we had that runway. And then I approached my managers and just said, what's the road here that makes the most sense for everybody? And they agreed that like knowing early was best. And we just made the decision that I would tell my team that I was making a family choice and I didn't want to come back, and that I would talk to them if they needed, guidance on transitioning. And that was it.
So when you had that conversation with them, I guess in early December sometime, was your mind 100% made up at that point? Like, was this, hey, I'm leaving, let's just figure out the exact time? Or, I mean, what if they had said, and I don't even know if this is plausible based on the maternity leave and such, but like, what if they'd said, your bonus is 0 unless you stay until mid next year? I mean, first, could they do that? And be like, were you already 100% mind made up at that point?
It would have been really, really hard for them to do that, just because the company was small enough that would have gotten around very quickly.
What about the other half of that? What if they had offered to double your salary? Was there a number that could have kept you?
I don't think at that point there was. I was in a difficult enough place that I just wanted out. So had they said 0, I think I probably would have pushed them on it, because that's just generally not their policy. It would have been surprising. If they had said double it, I don't know. I couldn't at that point even think about going back after the maternity leave.
This is really interesting because this comes down to what is it in life that you value, and you're making a choice based on that with probably more clarity than most of us ever have had. You're at this point, you're like, I just can't keep doing it all. What is it that I value? And you make a decision that aligns with that. Let's talk about your financials a little bit. So you've been saving an incredible amount of money. You have this huge salary that you've been shoveling it all into index funds. You said you hadn't reached financial independence, but it sounds like you had at least reached coast financial independence, right? And I'd be curious to see how you would define that. In my mind, it's kind of this idea that from the age that you are now up until that, 59 and a half, if you never save another dollar again, as long as you leave the money that you have alone, you're going to be just fine. So you can be paycheck to paycheck for the rest of your working career, and things are going to work out just fine for you. Is that close to what you consider Coast-Fi, or do you have a twist on that?
That's exactly what we thought about. So that was another number I ran before I made this decision was, okay, if we do this and I just make enough with whatever business I start or whatever that covers our living expenses, and we're not able to put another dollar into retirement, what does this look like? And the number I came out with was that with normal returns, a little bit conservative because of my nature, we would be able to be full FI, and we retire if that's what I chose to do between 40 and 45. And that still was super early retirement. And I was comfortable making that trade-off.
So yeah, I just want to slow down on this for a second, because I suspect there are people who are listening who are saying, oh, this must have been easy. She made all this money. She saved all this money. But imagine for a second walking away from a $450,000 salary that undoubtedly was going to go up, right? As you got promotions.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this could have been millions of dollars, and you weren't at FI yet. That's what I want the audience to take away. Think about how difficult this would be. And you got to this point. It didn't seem worth it anymore. Your family and your overall well-being were just so much more important than the dollars. And really, that is a remarkable decision.
And there's two things here. The first is with our working schedule, I did not see my son. So my youngest was not born yet, but my oldest, I saw him for maybe 10 minutes. Like I would get home, put him in his pajamas, read him a book, and put him to bed. And that's when I saw him during the week. That was not okay for me. And I couldn't justify doing it. Another 4 or 5 years, he would have been school age. I would have missed those years where he just changes so much. And I didn't want to do that. And that was the first part of it. And then the second part of it was terrifying. Like at first, it was funny. At first, I was like, this is great. Like, I'm so excited about this. It's going to be fine. And then life, you have to start living that way. And you realize you're not getting that paycheck. And I had to do our budget for the first time and actually like worry whether we were over or under. My husband's a stay-at-home dad and I have 2 little kids. And it was stressful. It is still stressful because we're still building the business. It was a scary decision. But even now, even when I'm most stressed about it, I think it was the right choice. Partially because if I'm having a bad day or the, postpartum stuff is hitting or whatever, I can stop, I can close my computer, I can go downstairs and I can spend 10, 15 minutes with my boys, which I couldn't do before, ever.
Wow. That is amazing. I want to spend just a few minutes talking, as you were just pointing out, for the first time, you have to it's important that you stay within your budget, right? Before it was kind of a luxury. Now it's virtually a necessity. And you have left this multi-6-figure income and you're bringing in zero income. Now you have your retirement savings are pretty much fleshed out and you're good shape there. And you have about 2 years of expenses in an account that you can spend down on, but there's no income coming in. And currently you have a website that you started several years ago, but you have no monetization. You're not earning $1 from it on day one of this kind of next leg of your journey. So I'd like to pause here and talk, just tell our audience a little bit about your website and what sort of content you are creating and putting out on that website.
Sure. So when I left, the site was about 10 months old and it was created from a place of, I was in this big Facebook moms group of like 250 moms, I believe, that all had their first kids due the same month as my first kid. And we'd all been together since like early pregnancy and gotten to know each other. And I had become the personal finance expert within the group. They're constantly asking me questions. And I found I was answering a lot of the same questions. So one day I was like, I'm thinking about starting a blog. If you guys have questions you want to see me answer, post it here. In less than 2 days, I had like 65 unique questions.
Wow.
And that became the blog. And so I started the blog in like 2 hours. I put some horrible theme up there. I let them name it. That's why the original name of the site was Mama Fish Saves, which was just horrible.
Maybe they won't hear this.
They know that. They know that's why the site has changed. But I posted every day for the first 30 days. And then we broke out, I think, down to 4 days a week. And I was just publishing really basic finance stuff at first, but then a little bit more about financial independence and about stress management and career and things like that.
So let's talk just for a second about the legacy binder. My wife, Danny, and Brad's wife, Laura, are helping us fill ours out together. They're both in the process of doing this. We're actually sitting down and doing a whole estate planning process, and we're kind of using your binder as a template to get all of our ducks in a row. And I'll be honest with you, this is something that my wife has been begging me to do for a long time. And I've been resistant just because I didn't want to have to know everything that I didn't know, right? Like, what are all the things that we need to account for? With this binder, you've actually done a lot of the heavy lifting for me. And for that, I'm very grateful. But I'm curious, from your perspective, why did you make this? What was the inspiration to create the family emergency binder?
When I was pregnant with my first, I was actually at a life insurance physical exam, which I'm sure you guys have been through. And I was sitting there like, crap, like if something actually happened to me, yes, my husband would now have this money, but he would have no idea what to do with it because I manage all our finances. I manage all the back end stuff, all our insurance, all our bill paying goes through me to the extent that he doesn't even know the passwords to half the accounts. We were actually joking, he wouldn't mind me telling you this, we're currently in the process of buying a house. And the real estate attorney asked him what our bank was, like where our checking account was. And he froze. He was like, I don't know.
Why are you putting me on the spot?
What are you talking about? So I knew I needed something to guide that through. And then both of my parents lost a parent when they were young. My dad was 12, my mom was 14. And I knew that had impacted their lives and that there was ways that could have been not never easy, but easier. And I wanted that in place. So I started slowly compiling what we used to call our hit by a bus binder. When we started marketing, we decided it should probably be softer than that had all the information that we needed. And as Henry, my oldest, got, a little bit bigger, he's now 3, Jeremiah, my husband, started adding in some things that I might not know because I'm not managing the day-to-day when I'm working. So that's where it came about. And the decision to make it into something that other people could use was that I posted it a few places on social media. I think I was updating it after we moved to Connecticut, and I posted a picture on Instagram, and I had all these people being like, I know I need to do this, but I don't even know where to start. What do I do?
Yeah, that's wild. And in reading through the family emergency binder, and like I said at the outset, I'm trying to fill this out now. My wife Laura and I have made it a goal to fill this out completely. I saw that you mentioned, especially if you have kids, that you should consider getting a will drafted up. Is that the first step? Or what would you recommend for someone? I mean, someone out there is listening. They have no plan. Maybe they're the single point of failure in their family, just like you are, right? Just like I am in my life, where I do all the banking, right? I mean, my wife Laura can certainly handle it, but I just happen to do it. But I'm the single point of failure. How do we plan for this? What are the first couple of steps that you would recommend for someone who's never even contemplated this before?
So the first steps I tell everybody is you have to have life insurance and you have to have a will. And there's this gap, I think, in a lot of places that people assume wills are for people who have a lot of assets or you don't need them till you're older. But the fact of the matter is, if you have kids, you need a will because you need to have named guardians. And this is the other thing that I've discussed with a lot of families, especially since the legacy binder has come out, which is people assume, well, hey, I'm really close with my sister. And if I passed away, my sister would take the kids. But that's not what happens. They go through the family court process. And typically what happens from talking to estate planners and things over the years is that whoever is loudest usually ends up getting the kids. So whether that's your brother that lives on the other side of the country, or it's a parent or whoever, it's not going to necessarily be who you want your first choice to be. And you need to name those people to provide some stability for your kids if that ever happened. So those two things I always say are first. And for a will, the other common misconception is that it's expensive. And if you go through an attorney, it can cost you, depending on your net worth and what you want to do, $1,500, $2,000. But that doesn't need to be what you do. And there's even a company called tomorrow.me that does free wills and trusts. And maybe it's not the most customized will you can get, but it is legally binding. It names guardians for your kids. And if you get 1 year or 2 years down the road and you want a more detailed one and you can afford one, the way wills work, it's whatever was most recent. So you can write a new will with an attorney. The old one just goes away, and now you have a more customized one, but you need something in place.
That's incredible. So just as a bare viable minimum product, right? At bare minimum, if you have kids, you need to think through and commit to a legal document who gets custody of your children in the case of, because you don't want the courts deciding without your input. And if money is keeping you from doing this, you still need to do it, and there's resources out there. And then you can upgrade that later on if you want something that is really totally on point.
Absolutely.
That is awesome. Okay, I'd like to explore this a little bit further. So This was a big thing for me. Like, we've been talking about the importance of having a legacy binder for a while, but what I love about your family emergency binder is it is detailed. I mean, 170 pages and growing potentially. The things that you should be considering. I'd love for you just to walk our audience through. I know we can't go through every single page of your binder, nor should we. People should purchase this. It's worth it. But what should they be considering? What are just some of the line items to get people thinking about, just so they appreciate the fact that if they were to pass away, how complicated this actually is for their partner if you haven't had this conversation or been planning around that?
Sure. So first on the 170 pages. So what the reaction we get sometimes is that's way too complicated. I'll never fill it out. So I will say the last 35 pages are duplicates in case you need extra pages. A bunch of them are like dividers. You don't need to sit down and fill out 170 pages. Don't panic. But you do need.
You're right. Probably someone's hitting the panic button right now.
Exactly. I don't want to do that. I'm never going to do it. Yeah, that happens. So when we think about estate planning and what actually happens when someone has to settle your estate, so much more goes into it. And you need employer information because most of us have insurance plans through an employer or closing out other benefits. You need to know who to access there, what your current salary is, if you have an employee number, if you work for a really big company, things like that. They need to know that information. They need to know who to call. If you used to be in the military, that's incredibly difficult for civilians to navigate and understand how to file for your military benefits. Just general investment information. And this is something my husband and I talk about a ton of. Okay, if I pass away and he gets this massive life insurance check, how is he supposed to invest that responsibly? How is he supposed to know what to do with it and what that money is meant to do? So we have a page in our own binder, and there's definitely one in the legacy binder that's like, just write out the steps. What do I do first? Where do I put this money? What is it supposed to do? When do I use it? When do I not use it? Burial information. So this is another thing that's a common misconception, is that you should put your burial and memorial preferences in your will. But generally, your will isn't read until weeks after your passing, in which case the funeral is over. So if you want your wishes respected, they should be written somewhere else. The legacy binder and the emergency binder, and the reason we called it an emergency binder and not a legacy binder is it's not just in case somebody passes away. That's obviously the ultimate emergency, but it is the little things. It's when you're on a business trip and you get stuck away for a few days and whoever's watching the kids needs to take them to the doctor. Having not only a doctor's phone number, but a medical power of attorney that allows them to seek care for your kids. One thing that we got from my mom in particular about her father's passing was information for non-parent caregivers. So if someone has to take over watching your kids, whether it's because you passed away or a shorter term emergency, you have your own medical emergency or you're separated from them, what can you do to provide your kids stability? Who is their best friend and how do you reach their parents? What's their baseball coach's name? What's their favorite food that'll just make them feel safe? All that stuff should be written somewhere. And then the last thing that we cover a lot is a will tell the courts and will tell someone where your assets go, who inherits them, but it will not tell your spouse or your next of kin how to pay the cable bill. And that's the things that keep the house running. And the things you talk to survivors of these emergencies about that say, it took us a year, it took us 2 years to feel like we were back in a rhythm because we just didn't know what to do. The binder lays that out for them. In a time when they're totally grief-ridden and can't manage one more thing, this gives them steps to take.
And Chelsea, not just paying the cable bill, but where is all the money? Where are your assets located? I mean, to me, that's a big thing. Like my wife, Laura, I mean, she's obviously extremely intelligent. She's a CPA. She knows this stuff generally, but I have some random little investments she would have to track down if I didn't have them written down in one particular place. That to me is a huge value, just like consolidating all of your financial life, just at least the overview of where is everything we own just in one document. So I absolutely love that. And in terms of actually storing this, do you suggest people use safe deposit boxes? Do you put it in a fireproof safe?
And is it just one copy?
Those are great questions and ones that we answer a lot. So we have a physical we have 2 physical copies actually. The one at home is split. So the legacy binder is built into a basic family information, which is kind of those minor emergencies I was talking about. And then the need to know stuff, which is I really have to settle an estate. So the basic one actually just lives in my office in case anyone needs it. My mom and my husband's parents know where it is. And then the need to know one is locked in a fireproof safe. In the fireproof safe is also a thumb drive that holds the whole document on it so that if I need to update something quickly, like we change a doctor or the kids get a new medication or whatever, I can just plug it in and update it quickly. And then there is a hard copy that lives at my mom's house. So she's named as guardians for the kids right now. She lives closest to us. She could provide the most general stability. So she has a copy in case like the house burned down, God forbid, the information would still be there and accessible.
Chelsea, what do you suggest regarding password managers? So like LastPass or 1Password, as far as like sharing those items, and also even something as simple, like I was thinking about this the other day, two-factor authentication, right? So I have two-factor authentication on my phone, but my phone is opened with my thumbprint. Not to be morbid here, but if I get hit by a bus, my thumbprint is not available.
I don't know, dude.
Like,
I've seen some pretty cool tactics on YouTube and in the movies. Have you tried duct tape? It seems to work for everything else.
But no, I mean, like I start thinking about these off the wall things because you're planning for the worst here, right? So like you really do need to plan this out to like the worst degree. My phone has two-factor authentication, and Laura can't get into it because she doesn't have LastPass, which is behind the two-factor authentication. So it's a circular thing, but how do you advise people to head that off?
Yeah, so just a quick story on the planning for the worst case scenario is when we launched this, we got tons and tons of just horror stories of things that it was an emotionally exhausting week to like listen to all these people's stories. But we had one guy that had a fairly funny story where his father-in-law had passed away and had constantly told everyone that the will was in the safe. Everything he needed was in the safe. Except he never told anyone the code to the safe. And it was one of those big safes that was built into the basement. And this guy sends me an email. He's like, I'm like Googling how to break into a safe. I'm probably on some FBI watch list. If we drill into it, then we break the safe and we have to sell the house. It was like a whole thing because the guy had planned, but didn't tell people how to actually get the information.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So that happened. So for us, we use LastPass. I love LastPass. And my husband and I each have an account. For my phone, I also, use the fingerprint, but there is a code override that is both in the emergency binder and my husband knows the number, or he is named as next of kin on my LastPass. So in your LastPass, you can actually name someone that if something happened to you, they are allowed to gain access to all your passwords. It can take a couple of days depending on, how busy they are or how backed up. But he, with his LastPass account, can file I'm out of commission in any kind of way and gain access.
Chelsea, we've been talking about your legacy binder on our website for like the last 6 months. I'm curious, how many copies of the legacy binder have you sold since you created it?
Just over 2,400.
That is amazing. Congratulations. That is an incredible impact. I mean, that was something that you wanted to have. Think about the lives who, like, in their worst possible moment, at least this little bit is handled. The piece that has brought to the people that otherwise, like Brad said, it takes them a year to figure this out when they're already having their worst week ever.
Yep. It's been really great. And the one difficult thing is how many of those 2,400 people actually filled it out.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Because as we were pointing out, 35 of those pages are duplicates. Don't freak out. But it's still, around 100. There's a lot of, when life happens and you have 30 plus years of it, of different accounts in different areas and all these extra factors, you're not going to solve all this in one 30-minute sit down. It's going to take some planning. Even when you have the guide rails that you've kind of put in place with this document, what are the best practices and what additional advice do you have for somebody that really wants to take action on this over the next couple months and get it done?
Sure. So I would say start with the basic family information section, because in most cases, except for maybe your financial information, your bills information that's at the end of that section, you can do most of that off the top of your head. And then at least you feel like you're accomplishing something, get the ball rolling. And then as you move forward, just set a piece of it a week. It's broken into sections, just do a chapter of it, it's a few pages, and make it a little easier to understand. And also divide and conquer with your spouse, because there's going to be areas that your spouse knows better than you do. And make sure you're trading off and then reviewing it, because this is something that's been good for my husband and I of I can fill something out, but then I have to walk him through it. So he's heard it before if something ever happened, right? It's like starting that discussion. The one super hard-nosed piece of advice I give some of the people who reach out and say they're having trouble filling it out is your family's going to be disappointed if something happens to you and there's nothing to go off of. They're going to be angry if they find this binder and it's empty. So now that you've bought it, you have to fill it out.
That is amazing. You're so right. To our community, if you're hearing this and you're like, you know what, I have to do this. I have to do this now. I just need to let you know up front that we believe in this product. We're huge fans of what it is. We are using it personally, and we are an affiliate for this product. And if you want to get this for your family, you can go to choosefi.com/binder and purchase this binder there. It is shockingly inexpensive for what you get, and it will save you hours, if not days, if not months of what it would take for you to explore this and do this completely on your own. Highly recommended. And Chelsea, I guess just before we finish up here, if someone wants to connect with you and connect with your content directly, they want to find out more about what you're doing, what is the best way for someone to reach you?
So you can go directly to the website at smartmoneymamas.com, or we are Smart Money Mamas across social media channels. We spend a lot of time on Instagram if you want to reach us there.
Awesome. Now, on most shows, that would be the end of the episode. But on this show, Chelsea, we would love to give you the chance to tackle the hot seat. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the Choose FI Hot Seat.
All right, Chelsea, question number 1, your favorite blog that's not your own?
I got to go with the Financial Diet. I love seeing people's money stories.
Tell us a little bit more.
So the Financial Diet does a great job of bringing in different perspectives. I just like to read, whether it's advice or just straight, like, let me tell you your story. Personal finance is personal, and how everyone handles it is a little bit different. And I love getting insight into how other people are doing it.
All right, question number 2, your favorite article of all time. Now, this can be one that you wrote or someone else's.
So I'm going to go with somebody else's, and I got to go with Liz from Frugal Woods, How a Diagnosis of Postpartum Depression Changed My Life. This is a hard topic, one that I was struggling with when this article came out, but Liz is an incredible writer and explains the experience so clearly. I actually send it to any moms that are readers of my blog or friends that are struggling and don't know what to do or don't know whether they should ask for help. Liz does a great job of explaining her own journey and why it's okay to ask for help when you need it.
Yeah, Liz is a marvelous writer, and glad that article had such a positive impact on your life, and sounds like friends and family as well.
Yeah.
All right, Chelsea, question number 3, your favorite life hack?
Meal prep Sundays. So we switched over a long time ago to only cooking on Sundays for Monday through Friday. And it is just, with little kids, been the best thing ever. It saves us so much time, so many fewer dishes of we cook. And then every night we just pull whatever we want out of the fridge and heat it up. It's major time saver.
So I tried this. I want to clarify. Is this once a week meals?
So we cook on Sundays, and then we have food through Friday. Saturday is usually my day. If I want to make something that's a little more complicated or new or whatever, I'll cook on Saturday. But we cook on Sunday, and then that's all until the next Saturday.
So Chelsea, my wife and I do something somewhat similar, though in fairness, it's 99% her. She's an excellent cook, but she will generally make 1 or 2 meals in a week, and she'll plan for each of those cooking sessions to last 2 or 3 nights for each particular meal. Is that what you do? Or on this Sunday, are you cooking for 5 meals, or is it generally 1 or 2 that you plan for leftovers for multiple nights?
Yeah, so we usually cook 2 or 3, planning on leftovers. Occasionally we'll do 2 meals of 2 nights and then one thing that's really fast that we can just whip up the night of, whether that's soup and grilled cheese or whatever it is. But generally we're eating the same meal more than once in a week.
Yeah, that's cool. So do you have a list of recipes that you go back to? Are there staples that you'll see week in, week out? How do you and your husband decide which recipes to pick?
So we have we call our go-to family recipe list that's got about 20 things that we like. And then we have another list that's kind of seasonal stuff that we might sprinkle in. Some things are staples. So we eat chicken souvlaki every single week.
Sounds similar to chicken shawarma.
It's super, super simple. The boys love it and actually eat it, which, at the toddler ages can be difficult. So we do that every week, and then we kind of mix out what else is in there.
All right, question number 4, your biggest financial mistake.
Okay. Has to be not telling my husband to not buy an engagement ring.
Oh.
So he spent a decent chunk of change on buying, the traditional solitaire engagement ring. I hate rings. So he bought the ring. And I don't wear it. I have a $30 one he bought me off Etsy that I wear all the time. and that's it. So it just kind of sits in a box, and that was just a horrible decision.
You could have bought another bike with that ring.
Right, exactly. Probably multiple bikes.
Oh, that's funny. All right, Chelsea, question number 5, the advice you would give your younger self.
Don't be so hard on yourself. So I always had, because I'm a long-term planner, I always felt the need to know what I was going to be doing in 10 years. And that's just an enormous amount of pressure and doesn't play into the fact that there's gray and things change. So that would be my biggest piece of advice, is to live a little bit more in the moment.
All right. Now we do have a bonus question for you. What purchase have you made over the past 12 months that's brought the most value to your life?
All right. I got to go with the desk light in my office. So we moved into a new house about a year ago, rental house, and my office had almost no light, but I didn't want to spend money on furnishing it. So I just kind of sat in this half darkness until about 6 months ago, I finally bought a light, and it's just been life-changing. It's just like I can actually see what I'm doing now.
Has anyone seen Chelsea? I think she's hanging out in the Bat Cave.
Basically. Actually, I finally bought the light when I was using my ring light for shooting video as just like a general light up the room light. And my husband came in and was like, you should probably just buy a desk lamp.
Oh, that's hilarious. Chelsea, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. This has been great.
You know, Brad, there's so much about this episode, and I can't wait to talk about it more on this upcoming Friday episode. But the thing that really stood out to me is my wife, Danny, for months and months and months, probably for over a year, has said, can we get a good legacy planning process in place? Essentially, without knowing what questions to ask, she is asking me to make this a priority for our family. And to be honest with you, it's just too much resistance. I just didn't do it. It was this legacy. It was this binder process. It was Chelsea's product that she made that gave me a framework to actually do what my wife has been wanting to do. And what really stood out to me was, if you were to pass away or something horrible were to happen and your family were to go and see what you have in place, if you don't have anything, they're going to be disappointed. But if they see that you have this legacy binder, you purchase this product, and then it's empty, they're going to be angry. and honestly, it is something that we are working on filling out right now. We're going through the will process this upcoming week to update and refresh that. And then we are filling out this legacy binder. It is going to be completed. And honestly, even though I was doing it, this episode confirmed for me that this is like priority number 1 right now.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And like I said, we are filling out this binder as well. And yeah, I'm going to make it my life's goal pretty much to get this thing done by the date we publish. So when we do our Friday roundup, I will be able to talk about this as a final product.
Ooh.
And I think there's going to be such value psychologically there. I hear you, because Laura keeps asking me the same thing. What would I do if all this stuff is locked up in your head and you're not there anymore? Right?
It's so easy. It makes so much. It's just on an Excel sheet. It's obvious.
right. It's so obvious, right? But yeah, this is a really important product that Chelsea created. And yeah, just a wonderful story of her life. I mean, this was not an easy move for her. I mean, she walked away from this enormous salary. I think it also speaks to how important what we talk about on Choose FI and in the FI community, how important it really is, focusing on what matters in your life. And like she said, it didn't seem worth it anymore. And also, not for nothing, but there are people in the FI community in every walk of life, in every profession. And it's really refreshing to learn more about people who are in jobs that, I mean, frankly, Jonathan, I knew nothing about Goldman Sachs and Bain and hedge funds before speaking with Chelsea. So it's just cool to learn something new.
All right, to our audience, if you got value from today's episode, and if you've been getting value from the episodes up to this point, just take 1 second and press the subscribe button on the platform you're listening to this on. It just lets the providers know you're getting value from the show and you want to be here when we produce additional content. If you want to support us in what we're doing here at Choose FI, here are 4 easy ways. 1, leave us an iTunes review. To do that, just go to choosefi.com/iTunes. 2, use our page to sign up for travel credit cards. If you want to travel the world with miles and points instead of your hard-earned dollars, then just go to choosefi.com/cards and get started today. 3, if you're working on the milestones of FI, set up a personal capital account to track your progress and use our affiliate link. It's completely free, and just go to choosefi.com/PC. P as in Paul, C as in cat. And 4, and most importantly, find your friends, coworkers, and family members who might be open to this message and tell them about the podcast. Have them start with episode 100. It is a fantastic starting place. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast. where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.